Okay, guys, we're just going to continue our 1920s and 1930s notes from where we left off. But today we're going to be shifting gears away from the political and the social changes. And what we're going to be doing today is we're going to start our post-World War I world economic changes. Now, there's going to be two real areas in which I'm going to cover. The first one that we're going to talk about is going to be some international economics, but this does impact the United States specifically. So in order to kind of explain this again, you got to remember the backdrop of all these changes is going to come with World War I. Now, as we've talked about, World War I changes the world in so many ways, but what we need to talk about first is how it changes our situation economically. Now, as I told you before, after World War I and Europe's been destroyed, the United States becomes the biggest economy in the world, and we become the center for international trade and finance. What this means for us is we really do have a booming economy during the 1920s, but we still need to make up from a lot of war losses. We're still owed a lot of money by the Europeans that we loaned huge amounts of money to. So in order to make up for some of those economic losses, Congress is going to pass what's called the Fordney-McCumber tariff. Now, a tariff is going to be a tax on imported goods that are trying to be sold to the American market. So I do just want to explain what a tariff is real quickly for those of you who may or may not know how it works. The way a tariff works is it's a tax that's put on any good coming from another country to be sold in the United States. Now, with the United States having a booming economy, the other European powers want access to that market. They want people who can buy their goods. So they start shipping goods to the United States in hopes that they'll sell well in the United States. But with all of this European competition, the United States is now threatened by that competition. With that much competition, it hurts American manufacturers. So the way a tariff works is the government basically artificially inflates the price of incoming goods, of competitors' goods. So I have this little icon for you here at the very top, and let me just kind of explain where you can see that the red textile, this British-made cloth, is going to be $4 a roll. Across the Atlantic, the United States, the American cloth is $4 a roll. Now, as the Brits try to sell their goods in the United States, they've got to pay a 25% tariff. So a dollar is artificially added to that price in order for the manufacturer to make up for that tax. In order to make up for the tax, they've got to charge more for that roll of cloth to be sold in the United States. So you can see there that the American-made roll still costs $4, whereas the British-made roll now costs $5. Now, if they're the exact same product, that means that a normal consumer is going to buy the American roll of cloth and not the British roll of cloth. Now, this is just an example, but it does bring about kind of the bigger picture. This tariff is designed to protect U.S. businesses. It's designed to protect them from foreign competition. By artificially inflating the price, the tariff does what it's supposed to. It keeps that foreign competition price high, while comparatively keeping the American price low. Now, it's good for American business, but it makes it almost impossible for the Europeans to sell their goods in America, especially the Brits and the French, as they try to access the American markets. Now, as we've talked about before, the European economies are in huge trouble as the war comes to an end anyway. These empires are wobbling. They need money and they need it fast. Now, there is going to be a way for the Brits and the French to make up some of these economic losses. There's a country that owes them money for what took place during World War I. The Treaty of Versailles is going to make Germany pay reparations. They owe $33 billion in war reparations to the Brits and the French. So the Brits and the French come knocking to the Germans, telling them to pay up. Now, again, you have to remember the German economy is crushed. The Treaty of Versailles is decimating their economic power, and they don't have the money. They tell the Brits and the French, we'd love to pay you, but we don't have any cash. So what do we do here? The Germans owe money, and the Brits and the French want what's owed to them. We're going to start to see the Brits and the French mobilize for war, and they start to get the idea of we will invade Germany to get the money. The Brits and the French are basically preparing to start World War I again. Now, this is a disaster because we have a situation where now the Brits and the French can't afford to pay the Americans back. Remember, they owed us a ton of money in war loans. If they can't get the money from Germany, they got to find it somehow. So as the Brits and the French are mobilizing for war, here are the Americans across the Atlantic questioning what's taking place, and they simply say, "What are you guys doing? You want to start the war again?" Tell you what, in order to not start the war again, all those loans that you made to us, that we made to you, they're forgiven. No harm, no foul. Just keep the money that we loaned you and just don't go to war. Now, this maneuver by the United States does avoid starting up the war again, but we're going to see it doesn't solve the economic issues that the Europeans have. Now, I want to shift away from the issues that are taking place in Europe, and I want to talk about what's going on economically for the United States domestically, what's taking place at home. In America, we're going to have economic boom during the 1920s. In fact, the American standard of living is going to be the highest in the world. Now, the standard of living is actually it's a kind of a mathematical formula that sort of measures what is deemed to be kind of a normal lifestyle in countries around the world, where they compare buying abilities to other nations. So a standard of living is basically like, what does an average person in America have? What does an average person in Great Britain have? An average person in France have? As far as possessions go, they measure it in a lot of different ways. So they measure it by just consumable goods, like do people have refrigerators? Is that a normal appliance to have? Do people have lawnmowers? That's a normal thing to have. But one of the biggest things that the standard of living index is going to measure is how many cars do you have? The car becomes a piece of standardized living in America because we're going to see something take place that makes the car affordable. Now, before the process that we're going to talk about in a moment, a car was invented really in the mid-late 1800s, but it was so complicated and had so many moving parts, and a lot of these moving parts would simply break very easily, that owning a car really wasn't economically viable. It was just too expensive. Only the richest monarchs of Europe could ever actually afford a car because it was a work of art. You needed basically a live-in mechanic to actually keep it running. If you are going to have cars that break down constantly and are so expensive only the richest people in the world can afford it, it's not a technology that will ever grow. We need a way to bring down the cost of a car. Henry Ford, an American, is going to come up with a way to streamline the assembly line. Now, we've kind of talked about this idea before. The assembly line is not an American idea, but it's perfected by the Americans. Henry Ford sees the assembly line as a way to make cars more affordable. Now, the way it works is on the assembly line, you have very low-skilled workers, people who know how to do one thing, but that's all they have to do. You stand at one position on the assembly line, the car comes towards you, and you do your job. So I use just a few examples. If your job is to put the tires on, all you do all day is just put the tires on. When you put the tire on the car, the assembly line moves it down from you and goes on to the next person with their skill. From there, another car pulls up to you. You put the tires on that car. Once the tires are on, that car moves down the line. You don't have to be an expert in every step of making the car. You have to be an expert in one small area. Now, this streamlines the production process. By streamlining the production process, Henry Ford discovers very fast that you can make a lot of cars very quickly. The more supply, the lower the price. Now, these cars are hardly a work of art. They're going to be built for the average person. What Henry Ford is going to create is the mass production of the Ford Model T. Now, like I say, it's not a work of art, it's for average people. So you take what used to be this very complex machine and simplify it, where every person on the assembly line just does their job. Now, Henry Ford always thought, I need to keep costs down as much as possible so that the average person can afford it. Henry Ford discovered that the cheapest color to put on to paint a car was black. It was the most readily available. So someone came to Henry Ford throughout his process and said, I don't want a black car. I want a car that stands out. I want a yellow car. Can you paint it yellow for me? And Henry Ford's famous line is, the great thing about Fords is you can have it in any color you want, as long as that color's black. He wants to keep them as cheap as possible, and making all the same car is the cheapest way to make it. Now, Henry Ford was a business genius, because something else he realized too is that most Americans probably didn't have enough cash on hand to simply just buy a car. I'd say even today that most people don't have enough cash readily available to buy a brand new car. So Henry Ford said, I will let you buy the car today without enough money to buy it. I'm going to give you this car on credit. Now, this idea is not a new idea, but Henry Ford keeps it internally. He keeps it within the Ford Motor Company. So basically what you're doing is you're borrowing money from the Ford Motor Company to buy a Ford Model T. He's the one who's taking the risk by loaning you the money. However, the way the process works is you take the car home today, and every so often, every month or every week, however it's designed, you simply pay Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company in installments. You owe a certain amount of money each month, and after the months go by, eventually you pay off the loan. You own the car. Now again, this is genius by Henry Ford, because what he would do is make these loans to people to buy his car. If you don't pay off the loan, he just takes the car back. Now the idea is, where if you do pay off the loan, it's yours. If you don't pay off the loan, then Henry Ford gets to keep the amount of money that you did that you did put into paying down the loan. And if you default on the loan, he gets the car back to sell it to someone else. So the idea is sound. You buy the car, and every month you just pay it back. Now, this allows for average Americans to own a car. Now, you have to kind of keep something in mind. Just years before this, only the richest people in the world were able to own cars. Henry Ford has made it so that now average individuals can now own a car. It's going to change the world to a point where cars are going to start to be on every street around the nation. Having car ownership changes socially and economically the United States. Now, I want to pause this right here because I'm running out of time, but there's going to be another quick lecture series that's coming up in a little bit. So just be certain that you watch this lecture and the one that comes after it.